The House will come to order. Calendar for the day. The clerk will report the first bill on the calendar for the day.
Senate File number 229, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to gambling.
I recognize the author, Representative Sanders, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I'm proud to bring this bill before you today. This is the charitable gaming bill. It does two really important things. First of all, it provides a lot of support and flexibility to our the allied charities and charitable gaming industry. The folks that are hurting out there, and the people that they benefit the most are all of our youth hockey associations, our volunteer firefighters, the legions, all of those things. Every single one of us has multiple instances in our districts where we have folks and groups and organizations and value members of our community that depend on and rely on the proceeds that come off of charitable gaming. So I'm proud that this bill does a lot to provide some support and flexibility for them. The second piece of this bill that's received a lot of attention is a part where we are instructing the lottery that they need to suspend their contracts dealing with online gaming and prohibiting them from continuing to operate their ATMs and play at the pump locations until they receive express authorization from the legislature. Last session, you'll recall, if you were here, members, that a bill very, very similar to this went off the House floor with an overwhelming amount of support. Similarly, in the Senate, very, very strong support, because we knew that the importance of the legislature authorizing gaming initiatives or gaming activities moving forward is something that expressly comes through the power of the legislature. At the heart of the issue, the question is this: who makes the laws in this state? The regulatory agencies or the legislature? Members, every piece of gaming expansion or gaming activity has come through the legislature, may it be big or small, whether it be the constitutional amendment that even said that the legislature would authorize and set up the state lottery, down through everything in 349A. The legislature is the determinant. We, as the House and the Senate, determine which direction gaming goes in this state. I wish that we didn't have to have this portion today. I want to thank Chair Davids for his work and his help on this bill, and for the language that he has carried in addition to this bill. But I wish we didn't have to have the portion of this bill today where we were suspending those contracts. I wish that the lottery on their own would have said, okay, we hear the legislature. We hear that when over 100 legislators almost unanimously say, hey, you guys should stop, that they should have voluntarily said, okay, we're going to suspend these contracts on our own, and we're going to come to the legislature. We're going to ask you for permission and authority to do that. But that didn't happen. So unfortunately, we're back here today to stand up for separation of powers, to stand up for the Minnesota House of Representatives, which I'm very proud to do, to say that we are the ones that make the laws in this state. But members, overall, again, I want to just express the support that I have and the pride that I have for carrying this bill for the charities. And I've got two little boys that play hockey in the Youth Hockey Association up in Spring Lake Park, and I'll tell you, it's such a big deal for these local associations, legions, our volunteer firefighters that depend on these proceeds. So members, I ask for a big green vote today. Thank you.
Representative Smith offers the following amendment.
Smith moves to amend Senate File number 229, the third engrossment, and the amendment is coded A10.
I call upon the author of the amendment from Hennepin, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, want to thank Representative Sanders for bringing forth a good bill. And I agree with the idea that it would have been ideal if the lottery did not put us in this position. My path for resolving this situation is a little bit different than Representative Sanders. And this amendment, members, allows the contracts to continue until their natural term. And then at that point, this part of the lottery program would cease to exist. I think this is the best way to deal with this issue. It creates it mitigates the opportunity for any damage, any unnecessary expense for the state, while it still accomplishes the same goal of bringing the lottery in line with legislative overview. Thank you.
Discussion to the amendment. Member from Anoka, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Smith, I know that this has been your thought process, your position that you've had from the very beginning, so I respect that. But members, I'm going to ask for a no vote on this amendment. And there's a couple of reasons why. But the big one for me is we have the lottery, regulating agency, that says, okay, we get it, we hear you. And on the back of this amendment here, it says, okay, you know what? We do need to come to you for authority to do online lottery games. To expand our games, we need to come to you. We get that. We agree to that. But just please, let us keep doing what we're doing until we're done. That doesn't make any sense. I know that if my kids came to me and said, hey, Dad, I know that I'm breaking the rules, but just let me keep doing this for another 2.5 years, and then I promise I'll stop, and I'll get your authority to do whatever it is I'm supposed to do in the future. Or maybe try it next time you get pulled over. Tell the cop, say, hey, you know what? I know I was going 70 and a 55, but how about this? For the next 2 years, I'll continue to drive 70, but I promise at that time, unless the speed limit's increased to 70 miles an hour, I will drive the speed limit from then on. Members, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to break the law and for this chamber to stand up and say, it's okay for the lottery to continue to break the law for 2.5 years. It's just not okay. This is the Minnesota House of Representatives. We are the ones that determine through law, through the bills that we pass off this floor in conjunction with the Senate, what is law. The regulatory agency doesn't get to do that. And so for that, members, I would ask for a no vote.
Member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chief author, Representative Sanders, yield for a question?
He will. Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Sanders, as I understand it, when the first steps were taken into the world of online gaming, play at the pump, even ATM discussions, it was actually back when Governor Pawlenty was still in office. And the encouragement from both sides to the lottery was to be very entrepreneurial. In fact, we often use that term whenever the lottery folks would come. We'd applaud their entrepreneurial spirit, that they would operate as almost a private venture and seek to get into areas where there might be potential revenues to be had. And so I don't know that characterizing what they're doing as breaking the law and so forth is actually very accurate, unless it is based on us encouraging them to do that. But my question for you is really, and you may recollect, by the way, I carried this bill last session that passed overwhelmingly, that got vetoed. So it's not that I'm not mindful of what we're talking about here. But between Representative Smith's amendment and your bill, my question is, what do you anticipate the damages will be? This isn't a loaded question. It's just we had this discussion in caucus. A number of folks have asked me the very same question a number of times in a number of ways. I am, like Representative Smith and others, concerned about what the potential damages will be from breaching the state's contracts with these vendors. Do you have an estimate based on your study of the contracts in question?
Member from Anoka, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And getting directly to your question first, there is no way to know what the damages could be because we don't know if there would be damages. The fiscal note says, in an assumption, that the vendors have told us that we may sue. Well, if that happens, the fiscal note says it could be about $12 million. Now, I would submit that, there is a time frame in here where the lottery can come back to the legislature and get approval to do their online gaming, at which point there would be no damages at all. And that's kind of the point here. And I do think that if you read through 349A, and I don't know, exactly how much the legislature was proactively encouraging the lottery to be entrepreneurial or act as a private venture. I don't know how you do that in conflict with 349A. But I will say that I do know there was bipartisan concern all along on what the lottery is doing. And from the very memo that they handed out, and we saw in Commerce, dated back in 2012, not only did they say that they could do ATMs and play at the pumps, but they thought they had express authority to do slots, jack black, poker, roulette, craps, all this online. So it's because of that we have to take this step now. And I wish there weren't the possibility of damages, but you know what? The lottery, I think, entered into these contracts without authority from the legislature, and unfortunately, the lottery has put us in this position.
Members, if you could, take your conversations to the alcoves or the retiring room. The noise in the chamber has become quite loud. Member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Sanders, thank you. I actually, not to correct you, but I think you and I were literally sitting at the same committee table the last several sessions when we would applaud the lottery's entrepreneurial spirit and their aims at moving their revenues and continuing to set records for revenues. The point that I would make has less to do with lawsuits. And Representative Smith, I respect your amendment. I'm going to vote for your amendment because I'm concerned about the damages. But what I'm really concerned about is where I came from, just a humble kid from Inver Grove, is that when you give somebody your word and you shake their hand, you stick by that. I carried the bill last year. I'm like you, Representative Sanders, and so many others. I don't like where the lottery is now. I don't like where they're at in the world of online gaming. And the play at the pump and the ATM, and that's why I voted for the bill. But I do believe that when you shake somebody's hand and you tell them we've come to an agreement, that you honor that agreement. And that's what the lottery did. Representative Sanders, whether that was your kids playing hockey or somebody speeding or whatever your analogy was, I don't think we encouraged them to break the law, but we definitely encouraged them to be entrepreneurial and to enter into these sort of agreements. And we ought to honor those agreements, at least for the time that they are in effect, whether they're going to sue us or not, because that's what you do. So I'm going to vote for the amendment. Whether the amendment passes or not, Representative Sanders, I appreciate the bill. I support the bill. I authored the bill last year, and I expect it'll become law this year. Thank you.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do think that the lottery has become, in their entrepreneurial spirit, perhaps a little overzealous. We know from a document dated back when Governor Plenty was in the governor's mansion from April of 2010 that they were exploring new ideas. We might have issue about whether those new ideas that they were exploring were good or not. That is a different issue for today. I asked this body to vote green on this amendment. Let's have these contracts expire without any potential damage to the state, and then let's put forth an earnest effort to work with the lottery to have them abide by the rules or the spirit of the agreement. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments to the desk. The clerk will give a bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 229.
Third reading. Discussion on the bill. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 122 ayes and 6 nays, the motion prevails and the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1854. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 1854, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to transportation. Lillie.
Call upon the member from Ramsey, Representative Lillie, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 1854 names a segment of Highway 36 in Maplewood as Sergeant Joseph Bergeron Memorial Highway. May 1st, 5 years ago, in 2010, in the city of Maplewood, there was a carjacking, and Officer Bergeron, one of the local police officers, responded, and he went to a spot. You know, they triangulate these things, and then he went to a spot, and 2 men approached his car, and as he was trying to get out,
Representative Lillie, can you suspend for a moment? Members, if you could please be quiet, take your conversations to the alcoves or to the retiring room so members can hear the debate. Representative Lillie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As he was trying to get out of his car, the guys opened fire on Officer Bergeron in his car. And there was a person that was, they went off running away, and there was a person that was by that happened to be out jogging that early Saturday morning. And he offered aid to Officer Bergeron, used his radio to call for help and backup and assistance, and also to warn other officers that these guys had a weapon. Officer Bergeron died at the scene there. Murdered by these folks. Over 100 officers from the local areas responded from over a dozen agencies. And 4 hours later, pretty close to that same spot near Phelan Lake, not too far from here, there was an officer there also watching patrol, and a guy came out of the woods, had a big toolbox, and those two got into a fight for their life. Officer Longbello from Longben from the St. Paul Force, and ultimately shot him and killed him, but really had a fight with the life, or for his life, his own life. And a little bit later, they got the other guy in his apartment. But members, I'd appreciate your support, and Officer Bergeron was a hero, and also representing Maplewood is Representatives Ward and Fisher, and they're going to make some comments. But thank you for your support.
There being no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 1854.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. As tragic as this was for the police department and the communities involved, of course, it hit the family most severely. And Officer Bergeron's widow, Gail, is in the gallery with us today. Their 2 daughters, twins, Alexandra and Samantha, will graduate from high school this year. Gail has done an outstanding job of raising 2 beautiful girls without their mother or without their father. Officer Bergeron is greatly missed.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you've heard, 5 years ago, the community of Maplewood suffered a great loss with the senseless and brutal murder of Sergeant Joe Bergeron. There's not a day that doesn't go by that our community does not remember what has occurred. It's not only loss for us, but it's also a loss for the family. And as a community, we want to make sure that we support the family and don't forget what occurred. There have been several instances in the past few years where several memorials have been erected so that we do not forget what's occurred. One was at the site of where the incident occurred, and one has been at Maplewood City Hall. But we want to make sure that we don't forget as we move forward. I know that today, as a sign of support, the mayor of Maplewood, Nora Slawick, is here. And it is something that we want to make sure that as a community we don't forget, and that we remember not only the loss we suffered, but also continue to support the family of Sergeant Joe Bergeron. So as a request, we would ask you to please vote green on this resolution.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Franson votes aye. Representative Isaacson votes aye. There being 131 yeas and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 280. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 280, number 10 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government.
I recognize the author, Representative Knoblach, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Senate File 280, which was House File 488, identical to what passed in the Senate, is the contract ratification bill for 6 different labor contracts. 4 of them are MnSCU-related contracts, the Minnesota State University, Administrative and Service Faculty, the college faculty, the interfaculty organization, and the MnSCU personnel plan for administrators, as well as the Minnesota Nurses Association and the Minnesota Law Enforcement Association, which includes the state troopers, the employees of the BCA, and our conservation agents. Members, these are contracts that normally would have been ratified last year, but because they were in arbitration, the legislature adjourned last year before they were available to be before the legislature. They are in effect because the Legislative Commission on Employment Relations previously had voted them into effect last fall after the arbitration was over. So this is the formal vote that we need to ratify these contracts, and I would urge your support.
There are no amendments to the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 280.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members, I too would, as a co-sponsor of the bill, like to encourage a yes vote on the contract ratifications. It's important that we address this here today, and would appreciate support from both sides of the aisle.
Member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I would encourage a no vote on this bill. This collection of private sector or public sector contracts extends a set of them that came forward to us in the last biennium with very similar provisions, providing for very large salary increases for these particular groups. And the amount of increases, if you'll recall, members, those of you that were here last year, the increases were anywhere from 6 or 7% to 13 or 14% increases, depending on whether or not the particular employee reached the top of their steps or not. If they didn't reach the top of their steps, which are about 50% of the employees throughout the employee groups, you receive that higher amount. This is out of step with the reality of what's going on in the private sector. You see and have heard that the median wage of Minnesota families has actually decreased between 2007 and 2013. The latest data that the U.S. Census Bureau has provides that the median family incomes in Minnesota have decreased $4,320. And we continue to spend more on things around government. This is a huge government driver, the amount that we pay for our labor. And I would encourage a no vote to reflect a sentiment that would urge something that is more in step with what the private sector provides. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, like some of the evidence on LPR data, Representative Drazkowski's figures have no basis in reality. There is the problem here is that we always bring up steps and lane increases. They actually save the state money. When you go into the negotiation process, you sit down with the labor and the management, and you got so much money to deal with. And some people want a lot of money, and they don't always get it. And sometimes the requests are at inflation. Sometimes the governor puts in salary subs. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes if they don't have the salary subs, they have to take it out of their operating budget. But at any rate, sometimes certain groups of people are saying, no, you're not going to have as much as you want this year, and other lanes will, and it actually reduces the total amount that the state government spends on employees. So it can go both ways, and there's been a number of years when our valued state employees that do a lot of this work have actually taken 0 and 0. So I enjoy a lot of benefits here at the legislature that regular people don't get. And I think that state employees are entitled to the same option. Thank you.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Lillie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm glad that we're doing this. I'm a little jealous of Representative Knoblach. I mean, this is only going to take a couple minutes. I think last time I had to do it for a couple hours or something. But boy, you're good. I just want to speak in favor of this the bill. These are part of our team. You know, we set policies here and we set forth agenda around the state of doing good work. Correction workers, these are our college workers. They're good people. They took a freeze for about 3 years. I think Chair Knoblach mentioned it. And they're very much vital part of our team, like our team is here. And I hope that Representative Anderson's watching here and treats our own staff well as well, but we can talk that another day, I think. But please support this.
The author of the bill from Sherburne, Representative Knoblach.
Mr. Speaker, members, I don't have my file here, but I believe I remember that the total increase in cost for these contracts over the biennium was 6.44%. And so while it's certainly possible that there's some employee among the tens of thousands of employees that are covered here that are getting a 13% raise, my understanding is that the total average cost is something in the 6.4% range. And as Representative Lillie mentioned earlier, there's a large group of these employees that went without any raise for 3 years in a row, just starting with the first year going back of the last biennium. And so, members, I would urge you to support the bill.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 116 ayes and 15 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1679.
Senate File number 1679, number 9 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to auto insurance.
I recognize the author, Representative Swedzinski, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, before you is the TNC bill that you may have heard about a little bit in your email box and throughout this session. Maybe saw it in a truck driving by throughout the early part of this session around the Capitol. What we have here is the result of a lot of hard work between folks in the industry, this new and emerging market of business that has grown across the state, especially here in the metropolitan area and the Twin Cities. Some different businesses, obviously this is growing. The TNCs, the transportation network companies, are a growing part of our transportation network, are filling a neat need. We're looking with this bill to encourage their development, encourage their growth, while also understanding the uniqueness of personal insurance, commercial insurance, and how those two things play together in a growing business. The Commerce Department in January, wrote a letter talking about a potential gap in coverage. And that is primarily because of the personal livery exemption. So we all, as we're driving our vehicles, we have our personal insurance, whether it be comprehensive or liability. Under that insurance, if you have there's a livery exemption, and that's what this bill talks about a little bit. We get after a portion of that.
Representative Swedzinski, if you could suspend for a moment. Members, the noise in the chamber has become quite loud. If you have conversations, please take them to the alcoves or, if necessary, to the retiring room. Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are three phases when it comes to talking about TNC and their services. You got the first phase, when you've got app on. That's when you're out potentially searching for a ride. The second phase is when you've actually engaged your app on your phone, and so you're on indirect going towards to pick up a client. And the third phase is when you've actually got a client on board and you'll be taking them to their destination. We've got, in statute, that first period, and that's part of what the bill does, is looks at the BIPD, which is a bodily injury, personal damage portion, and we're actually working with insurance and working with the TNCs to garner up and buttress some of that that coverage in that first phase, and that's where a lot of the conversations have went. We do have a couple of amendments during this process. We do have support for this bill from insurance and from the TNCs, but we do have a couple amendments. If we could move to those, Mr. Chair, we'll talk about them and go from there. Thank you.
Representative Swedzinski, before you do that, I'm going to call on Representative Schoen, so just one moment. Member from Washington, Representative Schoen. For what purpose do you rise?
I rise to a privilege of the House.
State your privilege of the House, Representative Schoen.
Mr. Speaker, today in the audience we have the family of Sergeant Joe Bergeron, and I know that shortly we'll be coming up on the highway for Officer Scott Patrick bill as well too. We didn't get him quite in order, but our plan was to have a moment of silence for both of them. But first, it's an interesting time in law enforcement right now as we read the news and different stories, and we kind of lump people together. Sometimes we have issues where people are lumped together because of the color of their skin, and sometimes because of the uniform that they wear, and none of the above are fair. When you think about Joe Bergeron and you think about Scott Patrick, I hear people tell me, love their family. That person helped me. I hate cops, but those guys were good guys because they were there for me. Of course, I never knew a cop before I knew Joe Bergeron, or I never knew a cop before I knew Scott Patrick, because he came to my house and treated me like a human being. I didn't think they did that. But those two wonderful men left behind families. They left behind communities that adored them because they were in them every day shopping, stopping at the gas station, grabbing a cup of coffee, helping a kid put the chain back on his bike. And they paid the ultimate price. And I know when I go to work, just like so many other people in dangerous occupations, that it might be the last day. And I don't get to see my kids every day, especially when we're here. But every day I can is a pretty fantastic day because it might be the last one. So as we move forward through the rest of this session, I just want us to remember that behind that badge is an individual with a family, someone that wants to go home at night, and unfortunately with the families that we're honoring here today, they're not coming home anymore. So I'd ask for a moment of silence for both of these officers, and especially for the family of Sergeant Joe Bergeron.
Members, please join Representative Schoen and the rest of the body in a moment of silence to commemorate these officers. Thank you, Representative Schoen. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Swedzinski moves to amend Senate File Number 1679, the third engrossment, and the amendment is coded A1.
The author of the amendment from Lyon, Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment probably would reflect, if we were to go back a little bit and be able to extend this time that we're having this conversation about TNCs and from a lending perspective and just the way the process works when it comes to collections between insurers and lenders and within comprehensive and the way that process works. You'll see before you a letter from the Minnesota Bankers Association, and I'm bringing this amendment forward to talk about it and the need for it. I personally feel that moving forward, but in order to find some compromise on this bill to move this thing forward so that we can protect families, we can protect drivers in the way that they believe we need to in this new emerging great business that's starting here in the state of Minnesota. We're going to pull this amendment for the time being and potentially move this thing and work with the parties involved into the future and go from there. So thank you.
Representative Swedzinski withdraws the A1 amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Swedzinski moves to amend Senate File Number 1679, the third engrossment, and the amendment is coded A2.
The author of the amendment from Lyon, Representative Swedzinski.
This amendment, folks, really gets after trying to find a little more common ground with this bill through the rental community. When it comes to the Hertz and Rent-A-Car and those other organizations, they also have part of their business kind of a ride-sharing agreement. And essentially when you're dealing with insurance, you're dealing with a livery exemption, it's all about doing service for a fee. And so that's why we're moving this bill forward. This is some clarification language that gets after using essentially a website or a mobile device, but to only for ride share, so essentially carpooling, which your insurance is covered when you're not doing a fee for service. But in an effort to keep this bill keep this bill kind of in the range of support around the horn, we're going to pull this one back as well and ask for your green vote on the final bill. And I stand for questions.
Representative Swedzinski withdraws the A2 amendment. There being no further amendments to the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 1679.
Third reading. Discussion. Discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 86. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 86, number 7 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to data practices.
I recognize the author from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish, who will explain the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I think I have an amendment at the desk to put in the House language.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Cornish moves to amend Senate File number 86, the third engrossment, delete everything after the enacting clause and insert the following language of House File number 222, the second engrossment, and the amendment is coded DEA 222.
Call upon the author of the amendment from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, what we just did was institute the House language into the Senate file there. The Senate came over with the bill that had body cams in it. We haven't heard that, and the House doesn't have it, so we put the House language as it passed the Civil Law Committee and the Public Safety Committee. Members, this is the LPR bill, the license plate reader, the automatic license plate reader bill. Sometimes when members get up in front of you, they'll claim to have a bipartisan bill when sometimes it's only like 1 or 2 votes. This actually is a bipartisan bill, and I'll tell you why. Representative Scott and I have worked on this from different directions when we started out, and we negotiated on this with law enforcement, with the privacy advocacy groups, and finally, after days of negotiation, a couple informational meetings, and meetings in Representative Scott's office with all the groups involved, we came to a resolution and offered the bill up in civil law, where it passed with maybe 1 dissenting vote, and then I think 15-1 in the public safety. And there was some amendments tried and failed, and the bill kept intact the way it was. And I'll give you a quick summary. The bill started out scary to some advocacy groups and others because of the surveillance terms and other things and automatic license plate readers. And for that reason, the language we worked on made a lot of changes. It started out at 180 days, you know, and now it's down. It died, I think, in conference last year, year before, at 90. Now it's down to 30 days in the House. And I'll just run through a few of the changes here. Well, heck, I know them from memory. What we have here is now we have to report whether a stationary device is being used in its location. We have yearly audits by independent groups. We have a classification of data that the subject will be able to get a hold of the data. We have a 30-day retention and then to dump the information. And so if some of you don't know how license plate readers work, it's a device that's fixed to your car and automatically reads your license plate in the area surrounding it, admittedly, and then it goes into a database if the bill passes. Another few of the protections we made for citizens was if it goes into this database can't be shared with other law enforcement agencies only under certain conditions. So if Hennepin County goes to Ramsey County and said, I'd like this license plate number checked in its location, they can only do that if they have reasonable suspicion a crime has been committed and there's an active case investigation with a number assigned to it. It can't be just on a whim. Also, we don't allow the statewide database in this. Any statewide, there will be separate databases for the law enforcement groups, and we can't share it with the feds if they request the information automatically. So we put in a lot of protections with the audits, the checks. We have public logs that are accessible. And I think we've done everything to take care of the rumors around LPR. And you wouldn't believe, like I discussed in caucus earlier, all the things that you can envision this being used for and the scary stories in relation to this and that and the other thing, and keeping track of people from where they went to the sandwich shop to the sporting goods show and get a diagram of where everybody lived. I just don't think that that's happening, and with the protections that we're putting on it, I think we'll be good to go. Also, in relation to the retention of data, it's all over the board for the nation. There's, as far as I could tell, there weren't any states with zero retention. There's states with 3-day, 7-day, 3 years, and in perpetuity. So it's all over. And so I'm comfortable with the bill we've got now, taking it into conference committee. The Senate is very much like this with a lot of protections, and go into it and come to a resolve. But I think we've got a bill here. And as with the gun bills earlier, you know, one thing I tried to do is not to shove anything down anybody's throat before they're ready. We took a long time with this. We got input. I think even the DFL side will admit everybody had access and input into the idea, and most of all you folks on that side voted for it in committee anyway. So I would not like to take any amendments today. I would like to bring this in this shape into conference committee, and with that I urge your support. Thank you.
Members, we are on adoption of the delete all amendment to put the bill in the form, substitute the House language in. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor please signify by saying aye. Opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Lesh moves to amend Senate File Number 86 as amended, and the amendment is coded A15-0726.
Call upon the author of the amendment from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw the amendment.
Representative Lesh withdraws the amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Lesh moves to amend Senate File Number 86 as amended. The amendment is coded A15-0727.
Call upon the author, the member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw this amendment.
Representative Lesh withdraws the A15-0727 amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report this amendment. Representative Lesh, this is the A15-0728 amendment. Do you wish to offer that?
I wish to withdraw that one as well, Mr. Speaker.
So we will not offer that.
I can save
0729.
you some time, Mr. Speaker, saying I'm only offering the 0730.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Lesh moves to amend Senate File Number 86 as amended, and the amendment is coded A15-0730.
Call upon the author of the amendment from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, first I want to commend Representative Cornish and also Representative Scott for the compromise that they reached on this bill, including the First Amendment that just went on Representative Cornish's First Amendment. I wish it hadn't taken as long as it did, but I will say that the amendment offered by law enforcement in the March 13th Civil Law Committee, the DE1 amendment, was a marked change from the previous positions that they had held. Those are mostly reflected in the bill that Senator Latz sent over, Senate File 86. Unfortunately, they did not do the compromise work that Representative Cornish and Representative Scott had done in order to get this bill in a position that I think was palatable for most of the folks around here. I will add this, that I don't like it. I don't like the compromise for this reason, that it still retains data on innocent people. And if you believe that people in this country are innocent until proven guilty, by your ascension to this compromise, you are admitting that government can hold personal information about your whereabouts at any given time of day without your consent, on the suspicion that maybe you might do something guilty in the next 30 days, something that would be wrong in the next 30 days. That said, I do think they worked really hard because folks were coming from very different perspectives on this bill, privacy advocates, as well as law enforcement. And I have to tell you, I am very impressed with the lobbying power of law enforcement around here. They got a lot of clout. You saw it a little bit on medical marijuana last year, and many of us who have served on public safety for quite a years have seen it a lot. But they brought their full force to bear in order to ensure that the principles reflected in the Senate bill are going to be the result. So why am I offering this amendment then? The reason is because I think the compromise forged by Representative Cornish and Representative Scott, and the substantial work they did with that, is a good one. It's a good compromise. As I stated, I'm not fully satisfied, but they actually did the work to arrive at it. I do not see that reflected in the result that came out of the Senate. They went straight up to 90 days. Now, yes, the position of the chiefs of police 2 years ago was 180, but 2 years ago they were already saying they'd do 90. So there was no movement from that point, from the number of days on the part of law enforcement in the Senate. In the House, there was movement. So I do not think that the House should have done the work on a compromise bill on which many people have very differing positions and go into conference committee and negotiate against a bill for which there has been no compromise. To give you some background, why is this important? Because license plate readers, to a lot of people, even on this floor, it's kind of hazy what they do. I'm going to start off with this. The Minnesota Data Practices Act in Chapter 13 presumes that all information collected and held on you by government is public. This is an incredibly important feature of American liberty, that if government is going to do something to you, you can track down and find out why, find out the background. Our committee meetings are public. The Minnesota Data Open Meeting Law says that city council meetings are public. If we collect driver's license records on you that are incorrect, you can review them and determine whether they're inaccurate because they're public. If you have convictions on your record that are incorrect, you can review them because they're public. This is basic to American democracy. With that in mind, in 2012, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune was made aware that the Minneapolis Police Department was using technology called automatic license plate reader, ALPR. So they made a Minnesota Data Practices Act request and demanded all the records and images for a year. This was in June of 2012. Now, Minneapolis at that time had 8 mobile cameras split between police and traffic vehicles and 2 stationary ones that captured 4.9 million license plates in that capture. 4.9 million license plate images. Less than 1%, in fact 0.8% of those 4.9 million images were the quote-unquote bad guys. Okay, now, not necessarily, because this just captured folks where the image suggested that they could be a bad guy. However many convictions came out of those images, we'll never know, because all it says is whether someone was driving, whether the registered owner of the vehicle that plate was attached to had a warrant, or was driving with a revoked, suspended, or canceled license, or the plate was on the wrong car, so it could have been a stolen car, or the car was reported stolen, okay? So obviously there are a lot of steps in the criminal justice system and a lot of hoops that we have to jump through as prosecutors before we arrive at a conviction, which presumably establishes you as a bad guy, but in no case were more than 0.8% of those images attached to bad guys, and arguably probably much less. So that's what we're arguing about here. It's not about whether we want to catch the bad guys or the good guys. We're not talking about the hit data, the people that go into the system for which you can decide are guilty or not guilty. We're talking about the 99.2% of people who are innocent. I got some good friends of mine in law enforcement, and they say, well, they don't say innocent, they just say not guilty yet, which I appreciate that. It's determination and vigor. But nonetheless, in our democracy, you are in fact innocent until proven guilty. So the 99.2% of these folks that we're talking about for these images, these non-hit data, are innocent people. Now, with that in mind, an article came out on August 17th in the Star-Tribune. Obviously, they put all this work of pulling 4.9 million images, and they probably stuck an intern to work on putting it in a spreadsheet and determining what you could find out about people. Well, there were 54 hits on Mayor Rybak's car, so they followed Mayor Rybak around the city and determined where he went, his daily patterns, and that, of course, became a big news story. Ha ha. But there was a vehicle repo service also that was able to get this data and track down a car that they were missing. Good for them on that, I guess. That's ingenious. I don't think that government's in the business of surveilling the public for the benefit of the private business. However, if you're the private business owners, kudos, I guess, to you for being ingenious on that. And a lot of people said, we got to do something about this. We have to do something because this is unseemly that we're tracking innocent people. And even on August 17th, Representative Cornish was quoted in that article saying, even though technology is great and it helps catch the bad guys, I don't want the good guys being kept in a database. Now, Representative Cornish has changed his mind on that. Some of you have changed your mind on that since then. Representative Gruenhagen's not here, but he told me he changed his mind on that too because he's been persuaded by law enforcement. Like I said, I'm very impressed with the lobbying power of law enforcement. Out there in the hallway, you got the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information, you got the ACLU, you got those other folks. They try hard. I got to give them credit. They show up and they make their pitch, but it's really against the mouse, against the elephant. I'm pretty sure a lot of you had got calls from your chiefs saying, keep all the data. And if I was a cop, I would say the same thing. I would say, give me more tools to do my job. Now, most of you know that I serve in the infantry, okay? And we have certain rules. They're called rules of engagement. And those rules are not set by infantrymen. Infantrymen do not get to say the rules that we have to follow in executing our mission. And I would submit to you that either should law enforcement. Law enforcement does great work. They are on the line. They arguably have one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous jobs in our democracy. But just like soldiers, we should not allow police to set the rules of engagement that they have to follow. It is you, folks holding election certificates, that decide what the rules are. And you get to consider not just what the police think, although that is critically important. We get some of our best information from the police. But we also have to consider constitutional parameters, privacy constraints, all other kinds of constraints that go well beyond what is the consideration of law enforcement. I pulled those other amendments because I thought some of them were nuanced and difficult to understand, so I thought the most important consideration was ensuring that we sent Representative Cornish into conference committee with a position that was negotiable against the Senate that did not compromise. 0 days, members. Now, there are 26 new members of the House, okay? But for those of you that were here 2 years ago, 0 days passed with 128 votes to 2. Okay? Representative Hillstrom offered 180 days at the time. 90 of you who were there, well, 90 people at that time 2 years ago voted against that. I'm asking you to stick with me on 0 days for my amendment. I did not originally intend, as I stated, to offer this because I thought Representative Cornish did a really good job, and Representative Scott did a really good job in negotiating this. This reserves the use of surveillance technology. Well, my preference is surveillance technology is reserved only for those suspected of crimes. I think that is the best policy, and that surveillance technology should not be used for those people who we don't suspect of crimes, unless we think, well, maybe they'll do something wrong in the future. We're running into that problem on the federal level right now with the Patriot Act, which a court just ruled was there was an illegal provision in the Patriot Act. They did not rule on the constitutionality of it, but they stated it was illegal. But it seemed like a good idea at the time, when to vote against it was to let the terrorists win. And many of us, after we passed it, kind of felt like, well, the terrorists did win. when we're constraining our personal liberties and having to completely change our lives and be surveilled by government in a way that never happened before on such a wide scale because of that fear. The first question you should ask yourselves on this 0 days is, number one, do you believe that people in the United States are innocent until proven guilty? I'm assuming the answer to that for all of you is probably going to be yes. So then you move on to second question. Do you believe in the United States you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your daily schedule of activities? If your answer to this is yes, then any number of days more than 0 is an unacceptable invasion of your privacy. Now, on this question, the Supreme Court did not deliver a direct answer. There was a case called United States versus Jones in 2012. The decision came down by the Supreme Court in January of 2012, and it related to a guy in Maryland, in Baltimore, in fact, against whom the feds had secured a warrant. And the parameters of the warrant was that you could stick a GPS device on this guy's car, and you could follow it within the boundaries of a certain district and in a certain time over a number of days. Well, the police went beyond the geographical limitations of the warrant, and it went beyond the number of days permitted in the warrant in order to find information on the guy to secure a conviction. And the Supreme Court considered this. Now remember, they were not talking about mass global surveillance. They were talking about tracking the location of a single individual in that case. The Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional because they went beyond the parameters limited by that warrant. Note that in this case on LPR, law enforcement is asking you for this permission without a warrant, without any review by a judge. That is something, as the Supreme Court admitted in U.S. v. Jones, that we have not historically done. We don't generally do that in America, permit the police to track information on individual folks without a reason. You've got to have a reason. We call it reasonable suspicion. Now, a warrant is a much higher standard, which was required in this case. On this question, the Supreme Court stated, we accordingly held in United States v. Knotts that a person traveling in an automobile on public thoroughfares has no reasonable expectation of privacy in his movements from one place to another. That is true. And that is the standard in which they specifically considered this case. However, it added on because it knew that technology is starting to get used for far more than tracking one bad guy from one place to another, which you needed a warrant on. They said, even assuming that the concurrence is correct to say that traditional surveillance of the defendant over a 4-week period would have required a large team of agents, multiple vehicles, and perhaps aerial assistance, our cases suggest that such visual observation is constitutionally permissible. It may be, though, that achieving the same result through electronic means without an accompanying trespass, they had to trespass to put it on the guy's car, is an unconstitutional invasion of privacy. But that the present case did not require us to answer that question. The Supreme Court punted, but it hinted in their language that, by the way, mass surveillance isn't the same thing as we have now. Eyeballs on, seeing someone drive one place to the other. Even the Supreme Court recognizes that. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals decision in Jones that went to the Supreme Court after it came through the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals stated that a warrant was required in the Jones case because of its intrusiveness. And it said, a person who knows all of another's travels can deduce whether he is a weekly churchgoer, a heavy drinker, a regular at the gym, an unfaithful husband, an outpatient receiving mental health treatment, an associate of particular individuals or particular groups. You could determine all of that even over the course of a person's driving habits over the course of 30 days. It is unseemly that we would continue this. The procedural jurisprudence over the course from 1967 until U.S. v. Jones in 2012. From federal courts, from Katz v. U.S. through to U.S. Jones, establishes that the U.S. Supreme Court will probably rule collection of surveillance data on innocent people to be unconstitutional when done in this massive manner. You're going to be voting on this today. You're going to be voting on this in the same way our federal representatives voted on the Patriot Act over 10 years ago. And it seemed like a good idea at the time, right? Because we didn't want the terrorists to win, just like we don't want criminals to go free. And there's all kinds of stories, and I mean good reasons. Kidnapped kids. Look, my daughter's 14 years old. Well, I want the police to have every tool available to protect my daughter. If something happened to her, you're darn right I do. I also don't want to be explaining to my daughter 20 years from now that I voted for a bill that changed things for her and her liberties, and she's growing up now a different way than I did. I'm worried about that too. This is a balancing test you have to consider. In this balancing test, I submit law enforcement is absolutely doing their jobs, at least insofar as their desires. The lobbying efforts, as I stated, I think are a bit unseemly, crafting a compromise on the House side and then going over to the Senate and sending back essentially their static position. And you've heard, I'm sure, from your chiefs, your sheriffs, that they want this tool. I get that. Like I said, I would want it too if I was in their shoes. But you are here to represent your constituents as well. Please consider that. And if you want the compromise reached by Representative Cornish and Representative Scott, I ask you to stick with me on 30 days, at least in the hopes that we can give honor to the work that was done. Sorry, did I say 30? 0. Thank you. Tony caught me on that. See, he's got my back. Yeah, I changed my mind too. Please send this over to the Senate with 0 days so that we can come back at least with some semblance of an agreement that was arrived at in good faith by Representative Cornish and Representative Scott. Please vote yes on this amendment.
Member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should be able to do this a little quicker. You know, the reality is, we're talking about the access to data, and this was an agreement that was put together by Representative Cornish and all the parties interested. And, when it benefits us, then we compare ourselves to the Senate. When we don't want it, then we don't say we're the Senate. Hey, we're the House. This is our bill. This is what we did, so let's stick with it. But what we need to talk about is access to that data. And if we don't do something, then your data is going to be available to every single person, whether it's some credit card company or a tow company, a repo company, whatever it may be, then they can come in and track you and market to you whatever you want. And I think that's wrong too. That's the issue we're trying to fix. And when you say that we all supported 0 days, well, that was the bill we had the chance to vote on to protect people's identity and their data. That was all we had. That was the only chance, because I can guarantee I supported Representative Hillstrom's bill, and I said this in committee more than once that, you know what, I wasn't happy with 30. I certainly wasn't happy with 0, but that was the compromise that we put together, because we don't all get what we want when we're in here sometimes. We've heard this argument time and time again come through committee. This is the bill that the House put together in the committees through the committee process over this period of time. It should go in the shape that Representative Cornish has set it up so that we can get over there. The subject of the data can go in and request a check on that anytime, and they can get access to it. We could go into all the stories. We've had this argument about protecting children, protecting public safety, but the reality is we do have to protect the data of Minnesotans and their privacy, and we also have to protect their public safety interests as well, and that's what they expect. We have these tools available to us. Using them appropriately, properly, and controlling the access to that data is the key, and many departments are taking those steps because we've seen what has happened with DVS. DVS has taken great measures.
It's controlled access. You have to provide more information than you ever did before. We're taking those steps appropriately now. Let's continue to work with it. Please support Representative Cornish and vote down the Lesh Amendment. And I don't know that I would, unseemly might have been a little harsh, Representative Lesh, but I know you're passionate too.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And Representative Lesh, it's very rarely that I'll disagree with the position that you take, but today I'm going to, and I'm going to speak against your amendment. And I want to give credit where credit is due, and Representative Cornish and folks on your side of the aisle, and just as many folks on this side of the aisle too, that have come together and worked out a compromise agreement. I certainly would have been in support of a longer period of time, but I understand negotiations and I understand compromise. And in this case, members, there's a lot of different arguments that an individual can make, and I know everybody's got their own beliefs. And at the end of the day, you're here to represent your constituents. But one of the things that I heard today was, how do you best protect the interests of individuals? I'm not here representing law enforcement, right? I mean, I'm not here at the behest of the MPPOA or the Chiefs Association or the sheriffs. I'm here to represent my constituents. And I think that by giving law enforcement a tool that will help them solve crimes going into the future, that makes sense to me. And I think it makes good sense to my constituents. And I think that ultimately they trust law enforcement. Now, I'm a pretty big believer in protecting data from those that shouldn't have access to it. Somehow I ended up on the Data Practices Commission, so I get the opportunity sometimes to hear a lot about that. And I believe in that, but I think there are also cases where we can give access to information to certain people that we trust. And that's what this really boils down to for me, is that by providing access to information, and you heard Representative Cornish walk through the steps that's in the underlying bill now, it's pretty protected, even from law enforcement. I don't think that anybody here could have put together a better compromise bill than what is there. So for me, it just comes down to protecting the interests of the individuals in my district, and I think it makes sense, and I would ask for a no vote on the Lesh Amendment.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'll keep it brief here. I support the Lesh Amendment. I've got an Amendment A1 that does something very similar, and think that for many of the reasons that Representative Lesh articulated pretty well, that he's earned my support today. Thank you.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I speak against the Lesh Amendment. I'm in the unusual position of being very happy with the compromise just on substantive grounds. I would not favor, I have great concerns, I guess, with the longer period of 90 days, 180 days, for many of the reasons that Representative Lesh gave. But I have to say, members, in my experience, 0 day, if we're going to bother allowing law enforcement to use these license plate readers at all, 0 days just does not make any sense to my mind, is not practical. Because as the license plate is read, the realities are that it may take some time for the car to be reported stolen, for the officer to be reported down, for the incident to be reported to have happened. Now, as the days go by, that concern about responding to an immediate incident goes away, right? Maybe at 3 months or 6 months, 90 days, 180 days. At that point, you really are using this data to prove up some past crime. But if it's your situation happening in those first couple days, first couple hours, why would we say that in the first minute, if it happens that there's not already the crime having been reported to get the license plate data in there, we're just going to discard that information? So members, to my mind, 30 days, and we could go to, could have been 14 days, could be 45 days, but something in that range, to my mind, responds to current incidents without setting up a database that could be mined for past incidents and proving up past crimes. So members, if we're going to allow law enforcement to use this technology at all, which my understanding is that we are, that's not under debate at this point, then it does not make sense to me to say that we're going to restrict ourselves to, in the first couple seconds, that then that data disappears, and if your car is reported stolen half an hour later on, or actually forget about the report, it takes a while for information to be entered into the system. And in that case, that 30 minutes has gone by. Sorry, out of luck. There's got to be some reasonable period of time, and is 30 days in the range of reasonableness? To my mind, it is. I would urge a vote against the Lesh amendment.
Member from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just looked up the quote that I was looking for. Those who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. Benjamin Franklin. I think I will support Mr. Lesh. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, the member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, I'll make it real quick. I would ask you that you don't support the Lesh amendment. Nobody really cares if you go from Ace Hardware to Cubs or the sandwich shop unless you smack down the owner and commit a crime. I mean, you're in for a short amount of time in this database, and the innocent people are still innocent. And just trust your members on your committee on civil law and public safety. Your members in both parties overwhelmingly approved. It's kind of like me in transportation. I don't know really a lot about it, the basics. I depend on my colleagues on the committee to inform me before it gets to the floor. And in this case, your colleagues have given this overwhelming approval on a bipartisan basis. So I just would ask you not eviscerate the bill and leave it at 30 days. Thank you.
Member from Wright, Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just asked for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Are there 15 hands? I do not see 15 hands. There will not be a roll call. Any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment. I wanted to, though.
Metza moved to amend Senate File Number 86 as amended, and the amendment is coded A1.
Call upon the author of the amendment from St. Louis, Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think we got our answer on that last roll call, so I'll withdraw this one.
Representative Metza withdraws the A1 amendment. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Lucero moves to amend Senate File Number 86 as amended, and the amendment is coded A4.
I call upon the author from Wright, Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few weeks back, I met with representatives of the Department of Public Safety and the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and the purpose for the meeting was for me to gain a better understanding of the technical architecture of automatic license plate readers and the data flow, etc. And it was a great conversation in helping me understand that. In that conversation, we also spoke about security policies. And I did pass out a handout, members, and there's a few pages on it. The very first page is the first page of this document right here. This is the security policy that is written by the FBI, and it is required of all agencies or municipalities that choose to use automatic license plate readers. The second page in the handout is the first page of this document right here. This is the security policy for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And the way this operates is security policies are common in the industry that I'm in. Organizations have them. You've probably run into them yourselves in your places of employment. And the bottom one, being the FBI, serves as the foundation for the minimum standards of configurations, etc., in an IT infrastructure. The BCA then sits on top of that, and a third would be a local municipality would sit on top of that. Then the stack in its totality becomes the sum total of the configuration standards and policies and procedures that must be adhered to in an IT infrastructure. In the field I'm in, we're well versed with regulatory compliance mandates such as payment card industry. Well, that one is not by the government, but it's industry driven. But it's payment card industry, and it serves the same purpose, having minimum standards for the protection of data. Sarbanes-Oxley, some of you probably, or most of you probably heard of that. And that is, again, it sets out standards that are required to be adhered to for information technology infrastructures, and then HIPAA and high tech. Each of these mandates is applied to a different industry depending on what industry the business is in. But the point is, it's well known, and security standards are common practice. And in that industry, IT audit has risen up. And the function of IT audit is to simply validate that companies or industry is adhering to the mandates that are required. So what this amendment does, with that foundation, what my amendment seeks to do is simply take that same concept that's well understood,
Mr. Speaker.
It's very mature in other
Mr. Speaker.
Member from Washington, Representative Schoen, for what purpose do you rise?
Rise to a rule of order.
State your, I believe you mean a point of order. State your point of order, Representative Schoen.
Under 4.03, I think Representative Lucero's amendment would change the budget behind the bill, and therefore should be ruled out of order.
Mr. Speaker.
Hold on.
It was my intent to withdraw.
Hold. Representative Schoen, do you want to withdraw your point of order?
Noting what he just said, absolutely.
Yeah. Member from Wright, Representative Lucero, if you want, you have the floor. So.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Schoen. And what I want to do is just draw attention to this very important concept that private industry and others are adhering to, of taking information security policies and then using IT audit to simply validate that they are indeed adhering to them. And so what my amendment would have done was to take these security standards that must be adhered to and simply validate that indeed they are being adhered to. So I have the pleasure of being appointed to the Legislative Commission on Data Practices and Personal Data Privacy with Representative Simonson, Representative Scott, and others. And I hope that this topic is one that we can discuss in the interim coming up here, because it is very important to ensure, again, the compliance to best practices and other security policies. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my amendment.
Representative Lucero withdraws the A4 amendment. There being no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give a bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 86, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Well, hold on, I'm sorry. Members from Mendota, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You're in a big hurry up there. Members, Representative Cornish and I and several of the stakeholders did work hard on this bill. I am a zero person. I am for zero time for constitutional reasons. I believe that this is probably the best that we can get right now. And I know that doesn't sound like a stunning endorsement, but there are some really, really good protections in here for private citizens and the handling of the data. As we go forward at a conference committee, I mean, we have some really good footing. I would have liked to have seen us get a lower number of days moving on to conference committee, but I think we'll be able to defend the 30 days. And a couple of the things that give me some satisfaction in this bill is that there will be an annual audit, so that we don't wind up in a situation like we had with the DNR employees looking up driver's license data of private citizens, and so that will be tracked, and so those types of abuses will not be able to occur. So with that, folks, I would just encourage a green vote on this bill. I believe it is a good compromise and gives us a strong position going into conference committee. Thank you.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I had to fight for 0 days and still will, but I would repeat that I appreciate Representative Cornish's effort to compromise. I wasn't behind closed doors on those negotiations of how Representative Cornish did it in handling and suggesting the DE1 amendment in civil law on March 13th. But what the DE1 amendment did when they offered it, and there were 2 subsequent amendments after that, but in my opinion, the strongest protections were contained in that DE1 amendment, which is in the current bill that's going to be sent out to conference. Unless the Senate does the courageous thing and decides to accept the language, the compromise language that we arrived in at the House. So I really would encourage the Senate to be courageous in their vote and ensure that, and just take the House language. But the DE1 amendment, what it does is it states, and this was in with Representative Cornish and law enforcement came up with this, is it states that police must have reasonable suspicion, independent, established, articulable reasonable suspicion in order to go after people that have non-hit data. And I think that's really important because essentially what that does is it allows law enforcement to self-regulate. If law enforcement is going to set a squad with a license plate reader outside a gun show or outside an environmental rally or outside some other rally that is protected by free speech rights under the Constitution, or outside the SOB parking ramp to track when you come and go, if they're going to do that, they have to have reasonable suspicion to make that happen. And if for some reason they do that in another rally and they catch someone with something else and they don't have independent reasonable suspicion, then all the evidence they collect that maybe they couldn't have otherwise collected is out. Based on Fourth Amendment principles, it becomes fruit of the poisonous tree and evidence. Even if they find you with a pound of marijuana, you are not prosecuted. It is my hope that the risk of being irresponsible with this data, the fact that risk would result in guilty people going free, will be enough for law enforcement to tread extremely carefully with this very powerful tool that stands the chance of implicating our civil liberties. So I wish Representative Cornish the best of luck going into conference with this, and I urge people a green vote.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 126 ayes and 3 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1025. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 1025, number 4 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to civil actions.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Lohmer, who will explain the bill. Representative Lohmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 1025 unifies 2 laws currently in conflict with each other, while providing clarification that reporting and cooperating with law enforcement is an act of public participation. I want to thank Chairs Scott and Sanders and the Civil Law and Government Operations Committees who passed this bill unanimously. Thank you for helping the victims in this situation and myself navigate the language to be sure we got it right. What this bill does is to amend and clarify duplicative Minnesota statutes that protect free speech. The language in this bill protects someone from being sued for calling the police, which is exactly what happened to a few of my constituents. Many thought we already had a law in place that protected free speech and participation in government under the anti-SLAPP, Chapter 554. But what wasn't clear was the definition of public participation. Current language protecting public participation is too vague, which opens the door for frivolous lawsuits and the possibility of someone being sued for calling the police. In this bill, we make clear what public participation is by defining it. Also, this bill looks to repeal Statute 604A, a law written after the anti-SLAPP law without knowledge that the anti-SLAPP already existed. By repealing this and rolling it into the anti-SLAPP chapter, it alleviates confusion and leaves us with just one statute regarding free speech and participation in government, and essentially protection of those innocent citizens calling the police to report a crime. The bill is supported by the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, Minnesota Association for Justice, League of Minnesota Cities, and the ACLU, and essentially has no opposition. This bill passed unanimously in the Senate, and I would ask you for a green vote.
There being no further amendments to the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 1025.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Lohmer yield to a question?
She will. Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lohmer, you stated the bill has no opposition. What about this guy that's suing everyone? Does he oppose the bill?
Member from Washington, Representative Lohmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lesh. I have not heard from him, so I don't know. But since I haven't heard from him, I'll assume he does not oppose it.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Lohmer, I forgot to look up the guy's name again, and this is serious, I forgot to look it up on the computer. Would you be willing to say who we're talking about? Who's the guy that's causing all these problems that has a bill go through both houses of the legislature because he's going after constituents with lawsuits like this? You remember who he is?
Member from Washington, Representative Lohmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Lesh. I think I'll tell you about his name offline, if that's okay.
Okay, well, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Lohmer, I appreciate that. I didn't mean to put you in a bad spot, okay? But someone else can look up his name maybe on the computer. Members, I'm incredulous about this behavior, and I really appreciate and support Representative Lohmer's action in passing and trying to pass this bill and put it through. This is a guy that went after individuals. This is a bully, and that's everything from I've heard in committee. People came into committee who were sued by this guy, and they were afraid to say his name. I asked him, who are we talking about here? Why are we spending so much time on a bill for a guy that is suing people unjustly merely for exercising their rights as citizens? And they didn't want to say who he was. And I asked, he apparently has gone through a cycle of lawyers from different law firms, prominent law firms in town, that took up this guy's dirty laundry. Now, I say this sort of hesitantly, for one thing, because who knows, he might come and try to sue me now, despite the fact that we are constant. Yeah, I know, Dean's nodding his head, right? But I said this. I was talking to someone earlier, and I said, would I rather lay on my deathbed and say, well, I'm glad I hung on to all my nice toys, or would I lay on my deathbed saying I stood up to a bully? And honestly, I prefer the latter. So this character, if you want to come sue me, give it your best shot. But honestly, if we seriously have to spend more time for someone like you and what you do to these individuals and pass a state law for someone like this, I'm upset. I also heard, Mr. Speaker, that this guy owns a building in which the state rents for the lottery. He owns a building, and the state is actually leasing space from him, paying him taxpayer dollars to a character like this. Now, again, the reason I have to say this is because he never showed up in committee. So I haven't heard his side, and I could be totally wrong about this, but I'm operating on information that really paints a sordid picture of this character, and I would love it if the opposition came forward and maybe paint a different picture. So With that, Representative Lohmer, thank you for that. Thank you for doing your work. And I really hope to God we don't have to spend more time like this on a bill like this, because citizens are merely exercising their civic duty and rights in Minnesota. Thank you.
Further discussion to the bill. Member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. Thank you, Representative Lohmer. I think I told you this before, and Representative Lesh kind of hit on this. I think this is my favorite bill of the year. I'm glad you're doing this. I think it's a great bill. And to the members on the other side of the aisle and to the members on my side of the aisle, I had an amendment for this bill. I did withdraw the amendment. There's nothing wrong with it. I think a lot of work from people in this body and people out in the hall went into getting the amendment ready. There were some technical issues with it. We're going to try to find another suitable home for it sometime in the next remaining time that we have here. And I will, if we can find it, Representative Atkins, Representative Thiessen, others, I will come in. I should have said this earlier, and I did not. I forgot all about it. But Representative Lohmer, thank you for your work on this bill. Thank you for your willingness to talk about the amendment. With that, members, please vote green on the very fine Lohmer bill. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There be 130 ayes and 0 nays. The bill is passed and its title agreed to. Next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1587. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 1587, number 6 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to real property.
I recognize the author, Representative Franson, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 1587 protects family farms against unscrupulous spectators swindling our family farmers out of their homes and land. This bill was brought to me by one of my constituents and also a third-generation family farmer who had his home and farm taken by a scam artist. In 2004, Chapter 325N, the so-called equity stripping law, was passed by this legislature. It was a bipartisan bill, widely supported, that put in place protections against the equity stripping scams that were rampant at the time. This is the exact same kind of scam that victimized this individual. But the 2004 law does not cover family farms or family farmers. Under these scams, a homeowner is approached by a swindler who promises to save the home. The homeowner deeds the house over, and the scammer sells it back on contract for deed. Alternatively, the scammer sets up a rental until the homeowner gets back on its feet. But these deals are often set up to fail, with payments being unaffordable. And when it fails, the scammer gets the house free and clear. The equity stripping law was designed to prevent these scam artists from stealing homes. The law is also structured to allow these arrangements to proceed when, for example, they are used by a dad to help a child who is in financial trouble. When it was passed in 2004, the focus was solely on the foreclosure crisis in the residential home market. There was no intention to exclude family farmers. This bill extends equity stripping protections to family farmers. In summary, this bill makes it clear that equity stripping scams are no more welcome to be perpetrated against our family farmers and business owners than they are against our residential homeowners. I'd like to thank Representative Bly for his help on this bill, as well as legal aid. There is no opposition for this, to this bill, and I ask for your green vote.
There being no further amendments to the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 1587.
Third reading. Discussion. Discussion to the bill. Member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker, and I am in favor of this bill, and I encourage a green vote on it.
and compliment Representative Franson for finding a second path for the bill, which he amended onto the Ag Policy Bill the other day. Thank you.
Further discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Four. Hey, can you tell them to make me a no? Can you tell them to make me a no? Tell someone. The clerk will close the roll. There being 105 ayes and 25 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1519. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1519, number 8 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to lawful gambling.
I recognize the author, Representative Swedzinski, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I got a DE1 amendment. If we could move that forward.
The clerk will report the amendment.
The lead-all amendment is simply...
Swedzinski moves to amend House File number 1519, the first engrossment, and the amendment is coded DE1.
Call upon the author of the amendment from Lyon, Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker's members. The DE1 is taking some of the Senate language that we've come together. We've got a lot of work put in this bill. I'm sure some of you, when this bill was first drafted, maybe heard from cities in your districts. Currently, under current law, the certain cities, about 100 or so, take optional 10%. Essential local tax from local charities to spend on local projects out of the charities. That portion of the bill is no longer with this bill. This bill is supported by the League of Minnesota Cities Gambling Control Board. They have concurred with it in the allied charities as well. This bill moves to include random number generators as part of some of the gambling equipment being able to use by some of the charities throughout the state. A big portion of it also is a lot of our local charities, whether it be FWs or American Legions, sometimes have issues with their gambling manager. Maybe folks move on to a different job or a different position. A big part of this was to change that so that they could have a portion for an intern gambling manager that could take over some of the duties in the meantime so other charitable organizations could continue to operate even if they didn't have a certain staff person for a short period of time. Also moves some of the, thanks gentlemen, move some of the limits up for some of the bingo games that are allowed to be played within some of these establishments. Mostly has pretty much broad support, and I'd appreciate a green vote.
Any discussion on the DE1 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There being no further amendments to the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 1519, as amended.
Third reading. For what purpose does the gentleman from Blue Earth rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just want to quickly acknowledge some students from Minnesota State University who walked here from Mankato and arrived yesterday. They arrived shortly after session, as session was closing, and so I didn't have a chance to announce them on the floor, but I just want to take advantage of the point because I really honor, this is the fourth time the students from MSU Mankato have walked to the Capitol, And basically, they're always trying to find good support for public higher education in Minnesota, and that was their cause. But they walked 142 kilometers, which is very significant, and that's about 89 miles. And particularly, I want to identify two of them, that Dennis Durst walked the entire way. And he's a 20-year veteran of the armed services, and it was in fantastic shape. But also one other student, Tien Bui, also walked all but 2 miles. His ankles just gave up right at the end. But I just want to acknowledge the extra steps, the thousands of extra steps that they took to be good, active citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Johnson, and my apologies. You are the member from Nicollet, not Blue Earth. Any discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 129 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1350. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 1350, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to transportation.
I recognize the author from Dakota, Representative Atkins, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On July 30th of 2014, Officer Scott Patrick lost his life when he was killed in the line of duty during a traffic stop in West St. Paul. What this bill does is, and by the way, I should mention his family wanted to be here today with the Bergerons, but tomorrow in Washington, D.C., Officer Patrick's name will be formally added to the Law Enforcement Memorial. So today in Minnesota, this is our opportunity to recognize Officer Patrick and to tell his family and his fellow officers and his friends that his service and his sacrifice will not be forgotten. What this does is it designates a part of Dodd Road, that's what we call it in Mendota Heights, Highway 149, as the Officer Scott Patrick Memorial Highway. The first time I met Scott, he lives right along Dodd Road. And it was actually as I was going door to door, and you know that rule, folks, about, you're supposed to only spend 15 seconds at a door or 30 seconds at a door. I talked with Officer Patrick for probably an hour that day. You wouldn't have found a more gregarious, a nicer fellow who cared deeper or more deeply about his community and the people that he protected and served in Mendota Heights. So what this does is it designates that road on which he lived, that road on which he patrolled, and that road on which he died as the Officer Scott Patrick Memorial Highway. I would appreciate your support for this bill.
There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 1350.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The final bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 634. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 634, number 5 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to lawful gambling.
I recognize the author, Representative Atkins, who will explain the bill.
Mr. Speaker, the least you could have done was taken up this bill before I got choked up on the other bill. But this is the Gambling Control Board's they might not like me calling it their technical bill, but all it does, it clarifies and simplifies. I think the most important thing it does is it allows for extended playing hours of bingo at nursing homes. So that's going to be on my campaign flyer. I'm sure it'll be on yours. For those that have been tracking this, it came out of the committee, out of Chairman Hoppy's committee with unanimous bipartisan support. There was one issue, though, regarding Ducks Unlimited, where there was some contention, and the chairman indicated and everybody on the committee indicated we wanted some resolution there. We're working off the Senate language. They worked it out in the Senate. For once, every once in a while, the Senate gets something right. They've got good language with respect to Ducks Unlimited. All of the key stakeholders are in agreement and support it. Everybody supports the bill, from the charitable gambling organizations to the control board and everybody else that's weighed in. With that, I'd appreciate members' support for the bill.
There being no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 634.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Seeing the member from Carver, Representative Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Atkins. There have been a lot of people inside the chamber and outside that have worked on this, particularly the Ducks Unlimited language with Mr. Barrett with gambling control. There's been a lot of work done. I appreciate it. I think it's a good bill, and please vote green.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Conference committee reports.
Conference can report on House File Number 307, an act relating to transportation. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House, and the Honorable Sandra L. Pappas, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File Number 307, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. And the report is signed by all 3 conferees on the part of the House and all 3 conferees on the part of the Senate. Fabian moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File Number 307 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, Representative Fabian, who will explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the bill that has to do with the electronic verification of automobile insurance. There was a glitch that happened when the Senate took it up, and we had to go to conference. I want to thank the members of the Conference Committee, Representative Hillstrom and Zerwas, and over in the Senate, Senator Eakin, Senator Rude, and Senator Kent. Everybody signed off on the Conference Committee report. This is something that's been through the process extensively, and I would encourage a green vote. Thank you.
Discussion to the conference report. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the adoption of the conference report, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
House File Number 307 as amended by conference.
Third reading. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. Without objection, we'll revert to reports of standing committees.
Copy of this ordinance is in the member's desk.
Thank you. Members, a copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there are no objections, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objections, the reports are adopted. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading, Senate file number 1215.
Second reading. A report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Pepin for the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Saturday, May 16, 2015, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills: Senate File Number 1694, House File Number 748, and Senate File Number 698.
Motions and resolutions. There's a copy of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we'll take action of these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Hertas moves that Senate File Number 1244 be recalled from the Committee on Public Safety and Crime Prevention Policy and Finance and be re-referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I affirm that as my motion.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler. Member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I've spoken to Representative Hertas, and this is Colton's law that we passed out of the Public Safety Committee. This bill was not controversial. It currently is in the Public Safety Omnibus Bill.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails.
Bly moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended that House File Number 2296 be recalled from the Committee on Agriculture Finance, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
Call upon the author from Rice, Representative Bly.
So I move for a suspension of the rules to take up House File 2296, the avian flu funding bill.
Is there any discussion? Member from Polk, Representative Anderson P.
Mr. Speaker, it's kind of deja vu, I guess. So we just went through this yesterday and the day before several times. And again, the bill is working through the process, and it will get taken care of. And I would just ask if Representative Earhart would yield to a question.
He does not, Representative Anderson. Representative Anderson.
Well, okay, it didn't really surprise me. But again, members, you know, we talk about getting things done correctly and doing it the right way, and this has come up time after time after time. And not playing politics, in a sense, I think we are here. So let's let the process work. Let this go through the conference committee. I think progress is really being made on a whole bunch of different areas and fronts. With negotiations, so I would encourage a red vote on this amendment.
Member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. And because every day matters, I want to bring forth this bill again, and I ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Bly.
I wish to suspend the rules and declare an emergency to address the avian flu crisis. And to begin with, since I see Representative Hamilton is not here today, I want to issue a thank you to Governor Mark Dayton, to Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, Speaker Doubt, Majority Leader Pepin, Chair Knoblach for increasing the target, Governor Dayton's Deputy Chief of Staff, Schwantera Hardy, Commissioner David Frederickson, Commissioner Myron Franz, Commissioner Edward Ellinger, Commissioner Tom Landwehr, Major General Richard Nash, Dr. Bill Hartman, Executive Director and State Veterinarian at the Board of Animal Health, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, Homeland Security and Emergency Management Division, which activated the State Emergency Operations Center to coordinate the state's ongoing response to avian influenza. The University of Minnesota, from the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab to everyone at CFANS, including Dean Brian Boer and Dean Trevor Ames at the Hughes College of Veterinary Medicine. I want to thank Mark Knisely for his work on this issue, as well as Nancy Conley. Santo Cruz, of the Legislative Liaison for the Department of Ag. Steve Olson from the Minnesota Turkey Growers. Dr. Carol Cardona, University of Minnesota veterinarian expert on viral diseases in poultry, including avian influenza. The National Guard. Dr. John Clifford, Chief Veterinary Medical Officer of the USDA, and Secretary Tom Vilsack of the Department of Ag. Producers who came and testified before our committees, Chair Hamilton, Chair Anderson, DFL Finance Lead Representative Gene Poppy, and all the members of the Ag Finance and Ag Policy Committees, and members already dealing with the outbreak in their areas for their patients, and for all members here who helped move a previous bill forward and who I hope will give their attention to this very important matter. I ask again that we demonstrate how seriously we take this crisis by suspending the rules and send this bill on its way to the Senate and the Governor. Governor Dayton and the Commission have asked us to send them to a standalone bill. Let's do that and act on this issue with the urgency it deserves. People who produce turkeys and those working in related industries want us to act. We don't know how long it will take to pass an ag bill and what political games may be played with the livelihood of Minnesota farmers. I have spoken with my senator, who is the Senate author of this bill, and he will push for a clean bill that can pass and go straight to the governor. He agreed to talk with Senator Sparks and Senate leadership to push this bill through. Yesterday, the 2011 ag bill was referenced. Yes, that bill was passed in 2011, a year when we had a shutdown, but it was passed on April 14th, more than a month before the end of session. This year's omnibus bill must make its way through the environment bill. We have only roughly 100 hours left before the Constitution mandates that we adjourn. None of us know what will happen in those 100 hours, but passing this bill should be a priority of every member here. Nationwide, 333 million birds have been affected. Daily new infestations occur, 2 in Minnesota just this day. Every day matters. On the understanding that waiting means more time where we are not investigating the H5N2 avian influenza virus means not getting ahead of it, which could be beneficial to people. I would stress that you're not saying it is a threat. It's a low threat to human health at this point, but it has the possibility to infect people at some point. Reading Peter Doherty, the world-renowned immunologist, Nobel Prize winner, he talks about how birds are a sentinel for human beings, that they are a signal that there's something wrong with our environment. There is no danger in eating poultry. There's no danger of being infected in that way or passing the influenza from turkeys to human beings at this point. But influenza is nothing to be messed with. In 1918 and 1919, the pandemic that killed 50 to 100 million people was a flu that spread across the globe. Waiting delays finding the answers. Most poultry is raised in the southeast of our country. There is growing fear that this influenza will return in the fall and infect those southeast producers. We need to learn what is happening. To this date, we do not know yet what is causing the influenza. Dr. Clifford from the USDA believes that it may be passing through the air into the vents of these barns, but we don't know that. Every day we wait means a delay. Every day matters. My bill spends needed funds this year. The bill in the omnibus bill spreads the money over 2 years. I think there is an urgency. I think we do need to find another path for this bill and move it forward today. It's very important. We've seen other bills find other pathways, and even one piece of this bill was advanced in the Ag Policy Bill. I think it's very important that we take a vote on this bill today and pass it along, move it through the Senate, and send it to the governor's office. Thank you.
Member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Bly, I think you're using some discussion there that is not quite accurate. The money that we're talking about is not going to be going to research today or tomorrow or the next day. Would you stand for a question, Representative Bly?
He will. Representative Anderson.
Representative Bly, you talk about talking to the folks over in the Senate. What have they done so far in the Senate to push this along? Can you tell us what's happened over in the Senate? Looking back to the first time we went through this, it took a couple of weeks for the Senate to come back with a clean bill. So tell me what's happening in the Senate to push this along.
Member from Rice, Representative Bly.
I can't speak for what the Senate intends to do or what they decide to do. I did speak with my senator. I asked him if he would consider adding the bill to the Ag Policy Bill in the Senate. I understand that the intent in the Senate is to take the House language, so that wouldn't have been a possibility there. And they want to move your bill, the policy bill, forward. Your question about what happened with my senator was surprised by the amendment that came to his bill. He didn't like that. He would have preferred a clean bill go forward and that we move it ahead. Again, I can't speak for what the Senate is doing or did at that time. I think my senator knows how serious it is and is anxious to receive a bill from here. As to the delays, there were delays that were caused here by your side as well. So I wouldn't say that politics have not been played with this bill, but I want to put the politics aside and move it forward. That's my goal. I want to get the money to where it needs to go. And to your question about research, there is a portion of research, yes, that it needs to be done, but there's actually a lot of other spending that happens here that's important and would go towards containing and dealing with this avian flu issue. So I think it's still important to move it forward this year. As I said before, we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. And it's very important that we move forward and try to figure out what's going on and to solve it as best we can.
Member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think we heard that we aren't quite sure what's happening on this front in the Senate, and to push this along here, suspend the rules, doesn't make a lot of sense when we aren't sure what's happening in the other body. And again, research is very important, and that again is reason to advocate for passing the finance bill with Chair Hamilton. That bill contains good funding sources for research. He was a champion of that, trying to get more research in agriculture, and some has been earmarked to studying avian influenza. So more than ever, we need to pass that ag finance bill. And members, I would urge again a red vote on this.
Member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I rise in support of Representative Bly's motion. And frankly, to be real honest, I'm surprised that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't agree with this. I think it's pretty clear there's a crisis in Minnesota. It's related to the avian flu. That the word urgency and crisis go together. This is an urgent problem, and we just passed half a dozen bills or so, and I don't see why we can't move another bill along. The ramifications of the crisis grow, it seems like, every day, and this is a very timely bill that we need to deal with. I, too, am concerned about what do the next few days look like. We don't have a roadmap on that at all, and I think nobody in this room has an idea of what that looks like, and we could be very busy in the near future on that. I'm also concerned, very concerned actually, that the Ag Finance Bill is associated with the Environmental Finance Bill, and so they've been combined into one bill. That environmental bill has a lot of controversial issues with it that will be challenging to resolve, it seems to me, which could also slow down the Ag Finance Bill. I agree. I support the research program in the Ag Finance Bill. I'm a strong supporter of that. I think it's critical, and that's got to move forward. But this bill, Representative Bly's bill, should be moving forward today. I hope we can move them both forward, but move on this today, get going forward. And as far as the Senate, what the Senate is doing, I say let's put a little heat on the Senate. Let's pass the bill in the House today, send that over the Senate, and then we'll work on the Senate, and we'll get them to, we will be in a position to encourage them to move with due speed and get this bill passed to the governor's desk as soon as possible. Thank you.
Member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would the Democrat from Edina, Representative Earhart, yield for a question?
No, Earhart not shown.
He will not, Representative
All right.
Hamilton.
Would Representative Bly yield for a question, please?
He will, Representative Hamilton.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bly, you were talking about, I believe I heard you right, talking about some health concerns and stuff like that. Since the representative from Edina will not yield to my questions, Representative Bly, do you know how the test results came back on the allegations that were being made on the House floor as far as contracting avian influenza from eating cooked turkey, if you would, please?
Member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Representative Hamilton, I haven't seen those results, but maybe you missed my statement. I said clearly there's no danger eating poultry that's properly cooked. I don't dispute that there's a fear or concern about this influenza jumping from turkeys to human or from poultry to humans. But we know from history that influenza can spread. And it is a tricky virus, and we don't know what's going to happen. I don't think we need to fear, nor should we promote fear-mongering about poultry. In fact, I'm very concerned about our poultry industry. I want to make sure it's successful. So I don't know why you're asking me that question, Representative Hamilton, but as I said, I didn't see the results, but I have no fear that the results show that there was no danger in eating the produce that we have out, that's turkey or chickens or eggs. But you know, it is very concerning the number of hatcheries that are being affected, and that there are eggs. There was just one 2 days ago in Nebraska. A huge egg-producing farm was affected by this virus. Egg-producing farms are the most secure. That's what I'm being told by the industry, that we should be able to figure out how it's getting into those places, and we can't. We don't know. That's what gives me the sense this is an urgent thing. We shouldn't be playing around with influenza. We should make sure that we address it immediately, as soon as we can. Get the money where it needs to go. Start the research, whatever it may be. This isn't something to play around with. It isn't something to wait. We need to do it now.
Member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton. And then
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Bly, thank you for the clarification, because I went back and reviewed your testimony right before you voted against the avian influenza funding that was wrapped up in the Omnibus Agriculture Bill. And you made two quotes. One, you said farming is becoming more and more dangerous, and the other quote you made is farming is no longer safe for young people. And so my next question to you was going to be, do you believe that your quote, does it fall in line with what the Democrat from Edina said about contracting avian influenza from eating cooked turkey? But I think you clarified that, and thank you. Would Representative Bly yield for another question?
He will. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bly, I think you said in your statements there that your bill would get dollars to research and directly to the producer. Would you explain to us how does your bill, this motion, and what you're trying to do, get the dollars towards research and towards the producer?
Member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton, and thank you, Speaker and Chair Hamilton. To be honest, I'm not sure exactly what my words were. My sense is that if we move this request along from the governor, that the money will be allocated in the ways that it needs to go forward, and that the money will be spent this year. and that there's money in there for research, there's money for the veterinary lab, there's money to make sure that going forward we can test the samples that are set to the veterinary lab, we can continue the work that needs to be done on the ground and make sure that that happens. I think it's very important to move this bill and the allocations that are contained in it forward as quickly as possible. That's my belief.
Member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, if Representative Bly would yield for one more question, please.
He will. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bly, I just came from the Senate, and we were having conversations around this, and they are, in my opinion, after those conversations, equally as committed to taking care and addressing avian influenza. You've been bringing this up on the floor every single day. Would you please share with the entire caucus what knowledge do you have as far as the end game? What do you know that we don't know? Every indication that I'm receiving from the Senate, from the governor's office, from our leadership here in the House is that everybody has taken this issue very, very seriously. We have a good, solid agriculture bill as well. And so what knowledge do you have that we do not? Could you please share that with the entire body?
Representative Bly.
And thank you, Representative Hamilton. I don't have any secret knowledge, but I'm heartened that you have had conversations with the Senate and that they're anxious and eager to act on the avian flu issue, which I think is a good argument for moving the bill off the floor today. I think if they're ready, let's send it to them. I don't see any reason to delay. As was said already on the floor by Representative Johnson, your bill is inside the environment bill, which is controversial. There may be issues with that bill. I'm just supposing that could be that could slow things down. I do not know. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it could happen.
You done?
I think it's a risk, and a risk that isn't worth taking with this influenza allocations that would contain and deal with the influenza. So I think you make a good argument that it's time to move it forward. It's time to send it to the Senate. If they're ready to do it, let's give it to them and let them take a vote and move it on to the governor to sign. Thank you.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In closing, I'm going to ask that members vote against this motion. And Mr. Speaker, if you could call on me under announcements, I'd appreciate it.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 62 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. Announcements. Member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members. My announcement, I just want to congratulate the chair of Agriculture Policy Committee. It's my understanding that the Senate accepted his language and the entire language of the Policy Committee and passed his bill 64-0 and sent it to the governor. So once again, the Agriculture Omnibus Bill has made it to the governor. Congratulations, Chair Anderson. Appreciate your hard work and the entire committee.
Announcements. Member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that when the House adjourn today, it adjourn until 10 a.m. Friday, May 15, 2015.
Representative McNamara moves that when the House adjourn today, it adjourn until 10 a.m. Friday, May 15, 2015. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Really? The motion prevails. Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if Representative Anderson, Paul Anderson would yield.
He will. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, you mentioned in your comments on the last motion that progress has been made on a lot of fronts. Could you tell us more specifically what progress has been made on a lot of fronts?
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Teason, I looked on my cell phone this afternoon. It was the update from the Star Tribune that said progress was made and progress is being made and something could be close. I think Senator over in the Senate said that things may be improving, getting better, and moving forward. That's all I had heard.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I thought you were going to let us know that some progress had been made on that Environment Ag Finance Bill, which is what Representative Bly is trying to move, because that would have been relevant for us to know. And is Representative Fenton here? Or if she would yield for a quick question.
She will. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Just for clarification for our Rules Committee members, my understanding is that although we recessed, we're actually not going to meet again today.
Member from Washington, Representative Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Thiessen, that is correct.
Representative Thiessen. Member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson S.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A point of personal privilege.
State your point.
Members, I neglected to mention this. We're going to have a State Government Finance House Committee meeting tonight at 6 p.m. to do the pension bill. So State Government Finance at 6 p.m. Watch your emails for the room. And for GOP members, we're going to have a meeting immediately after session in the back retiring room.
Further announcements. Representative Thiessen.
Sorry, like yesterday, that reminded me of a question I wanted to ask. If Representative Anderson could just yield, Anderson S. this time could yield for a question.
She will. Representative Thiessen.
Is the plan to actually move the pension bill to Rules and then Ways and Means?
Member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Thiessen, yes.
Representative Thiessen. Nope. Any further announcements? Representative McNamara.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. The House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Friday, May 15th, 2015.